Hello, everyone.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you,
Hey,
Jonathan.
Jonathan.
Okay, that's what we needed. We definitely want to be heard. So we got a couple of seconds before we start.
We are ready when you are, Jonathan. Thank you for asking.
Okay, well, very good. Bonjour Kenegwaya. Aniban Makwa Dishnakas. Waganaxing Odawa, Anishinaabe and Dao, Mishike and Doda, Washnang in the Bayan, Wabu Zibu and Donjiba. Gitchin and Dum Mopi Nungom Gizigat. Truly, it is an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to incorporate one of our traditional practices that we do to bring everybody together. So I was asked to start this meeting off today with a smudge for this particular event, bringing the Native student body together with Western Michigan University faculty to just have a healthy conversation. And how is it that we could continue to support our Native American students in a way that is conducive for your academic experience? Just a little bit about myself. I am an alumnus to Grand Valley State University. As a Native individual, gaining access to privilege, that's the way it comes to my mind. Just accessing the higher education experience is something that at times in Indian country, we find that we might be the first generation that is going this far in our education. Like for me, I'm the first in my family to achieve a master's level education. So I kind of recognize how great big facilities, systems, and structures in Indian country, it presents a little different. So it's wonderful to have this opportunity today to kind of be part of starting this off in a good way, the best way that we know how as natives, to bring many minds together, many hearts together, many bodies together, many spirits together for one purpose, one reason. So we're just gonna, like I said, start this off in the best way that we know how, that we know moving forward, that we're all gonna come together and put our minds together to have a healthy and a robust conversation on how it is that Western Michigan can continue to support our Native student population. So I'm actually going to do two different smudges today. Sometimes we just we'll start off with a smudge to send away the negativity and invite positive energy. My elders, they tell me that when we light this muscadewa smudge, this sage smudge, that wherever this scent is, the ancestors know where they're needed. And as we continue to integrate this practice in our life, we find that connection to more than just ourselves, but our surroundings and all of creation. Now we recognize it's a virtual smudge where you're like, well, I'm not smelling it in my room. But that's the thing of this medicine. That medicine can go with the power of our thoughts. some of us, we've had experiences with smudges firsthand, and maybe you have to draw on your memory to bring that aspect, that sense, that presence of the smudge in your room. If you have sage, you're more than welcome to light some and to smudge your space, and we'll just know that we're doing this together to bring many minds, hearts, bodies, and spirits together in the best way that we know how. So I'll hold it up to the camera, and the camera's over here on this device. But you'll just take that medicine and virtually smudge yourself. When we're doing that, we're bringing it to ourselves over our mind, so that we'll think the goodness of one another. Over our hearts, so we'll feel the goodness of one another. Over our eyes, so we'll see the goodness of one another. Over our mouths, that we'll only speak good of one another. Over our whole being, that we'll walk it in goodness. And I'd like to share just a little brief teaching about sweetgrass, wingash. In fact, actually, in events like this, where we have parties that are coming together to have a conversation, we will light sweetgrass. In that way, the wingash is actually that unifying medicine that brings the mind, the heart, the body, the spirits all together for the common cause, common purpose. And for today is this conversation between faculty and the native student body. Now, sweetgrass, we have folks that, they're driving down the road and they could just smell it. Oh, it's growing somewhere. And we could go and look in the ditches and in the fields and not come across that. But this is such a powerful medicine that it could just travel in the air for many miles and have a difficult time finding it. But when this is occurring in nature, the blade of sweetgrass, it's like a flat blade of grass, but once we cure it, once we dry it, it rolls up on itself. And then it looks like it's a straw. But the action that's going on when that sweetgrass rolls up like that is when it wraps up the emotion. And so that spirit of emotion, and when we light this, you see how it's braided, and all of those turns, that momentum, that strength, and that power of our emotions, it just moves that much faster as it comes in, and it acknowledges that emotion and unifying, bringing balance. And then the purpose of this conversation is to create harmony. So I like this medicine, and I offer that up also for a virtual smudge. And in doing so, you'd be volunteering and demonstrating your willingness, your openness, transparency, and vulnerability for the purpose of this conversation. We recognize that there's many different ways to interact with creation, but we just wanted to start this off with that cultural perspective. And now we recognize each and every one of us, we all bring our ancestors wherever we go. We are all descendants of our ancestors. And that way we carried our ancestors' stories with us, whether we actually know them or they present as in epigenetics, but we all carry those stories of how it is that we got to this particular point in our life. So we wanted to set aside a little bit of time to acknowledge all of the ancestors who are gathering in this event. And that in doing so, when we honor those ancestors, we're bringing all of those generations of wisdom to this point, to this place, to this space right now. So I'm going to reach over here and grab my drum, and we'll sing an honor song to honor and acknowledge the continuum of time. That's the time of here and now, and back 7 generations, and then even moving forward in 7 generations. May today's wisdom and knowledge be carried from the past, but also sent into the future. Everybody go like this? Or you can give me one of these, not just mine. So with that, I just want to again extend my gratitude and my appreciation, not just for my opportunity to participate in this, but to experience this. I want to thank each and every one of you for being that conduit of the past to the present and into the future as we continue to build our relationship, rapport, that trust, and systems that maybe in the past hasn't been so native friendly. Let us continue to forge forward in building those relationships with the bigger systems that we have wisdom and knowledge that goes back way before the beginning of time, that is very conducive to providing an excellent academic experience for both natives as well as non-natives. So thank you for your willingness to bring your thoughts, your feelings, your experience, your ancestors' wisdom as we continue the conversation. Miigwech Binawa, Young Wamazin, be well.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Really appreciate you and your support that you have provided over the last couple of months to WMed. So thank you very much, sir. So I would like to welcome everybody to tonight's Courageous Conversation, Expanding the Circle of Knowledge, Native American Student Panel on Diversity and Inclusion in the University. So before I get started, I would want to introduce the co-founder of this, of the Courageous Conversation, Dr. Dixon. Want to give her an opportunity to say a couple words. Dr. Dixon, can you please?
So I just want to say thank you too. It's like, this is a wonderful event. The last event was wonderful. I mean, it was really very, very, I learned a lot. I think everyone learns a lot and we all benefit from it. So I want to thank everybody that's here, and that particularly the people, you know, that are putting on the talk, that are going to be talking to us today. And thank you, Donovan. Your partnership is like amazing.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. Thank you. So as we move on tonight, I want to introduce our moderator, Dr. D. Sherwood. Dr. D. Sherwood is a descendant of the Paiute Nation. She earned her doctoral degree in social work at Michigan State University and her master's degrees in social work and public administration at Grand Valley State. Dr. Sherwood has served as the Denison Professor of American Indian Studies and the Director of Intercultural Training in her previous roles with universities in this region. Over the last 20 years, Dr. Sherwood's work has centered on the impact of family separation and intergenerational trauma in tribal communities in the Great Lake region, resulting from their experiences of attending an American Indian boarding school. Dr. Sherwood has served as a consultant for several companies such as the Fry Foundation, Sutter Health System, Spectrum Health System, and Michigan Indian Legal Services. She was awarded the Western Michigan University Innovator Teacher Award in 2006. Dr. Sherwood and her colleagues in public health received a grant from the CDC to develop a national curriculum to address type 2 diabetes and tobacco reduction in tribal communities. Dr. Sherwood serves as the primary investigator for the Garrett Lee Smith, SAMHSA grant in partnership with the Great Lake Tribe. The We Walk Together grant focused on suicide prevention and early intervention with Native youth and young adults. Dr. Sherwood has worked with Dennis Bank, the founder of the American Indian Movement and co-founder of the Longest Walk to Washington, D.C., which brought attention to the traumatic experience of tribal communities being forced to attend American Indian boarding schools. Dr. Sherwood is a social work faculty member and MSW program coordinator for Western Michigan University. Can everyone please unmic your mute and give a round of applause to tonight's moderator, Dr. Sherwood. Dr. Sherwood, take it away.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Good, okay. Bonjour and welcome. We're so happy that you're invested in learning and being part of this conversation tonight. That's a courageous conversation. And we hope that you'll enjoy and that you'll learn and maybe just be open-minded to different feelings and different responses. You might hear new words and new terms and things that maybe you already know or maybe are new to you. And so we're going to kind of challenge some of the assumptions and stereotypes about Native people and Native students tonight. You might feel some kind of emotional response, and if you need to turn your camera off or you need to take a break or do whatever you need to do, we're in this Zoom environment. We have pets and family members and things. If you need to stop and attend to something, please go ahead and do that. Before I have the honor of introducing our panelists tonight, I want to share the land acknowledgement that the president of Western Michigan University established, and I think it's really important. So I will read that land acknowledgement. We would like to recognize that Western Michigan University is located on lands historically occupied by Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor the ancestral land of the Three Fires Confederacy, the sacred lands of all Indigenous people, and their continued presence. Thank you, Miigwech. Okay, so tonight on our panel, we have Native students and a Native faculty member. I'm just really honored to introduce them. We have Tristan Podolsek, and Tristan is Lakota Ray Ojibwe and serves as the president of the WMU Native Student Association. He grew up in the Chicago suburbs and currently lives in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He's attending WMU and pursuing a degree in biomedical sciences with a chemistry minor. Tristan aspires to become a physical therapist, and he is currently working as a physical therapist technician at Team Rehab in Battle Creek. So let's welcome Tristan. And then we have Tara Madri. And Tara Madri is Sault Ste. Marie Tribe Ojibwe, currently pursuing her Master of Science in Public Health and Human Nutrition at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Tara is especially passionate about improving food security for urban American Indian, Alaskan Native food sovereignty movements, as well as strength-based perspectives to improving health for American Indian and Alaskan Native peoples. Tara is currently in the process of applying to doctoral programs and hopes to someday become a researcher, partnering with urban Native communities. Thumbs up for Tara. Whew. All right, and we have Shayla Manitowabi Hubner, who is a member of the Wikwemekan Band of First Nation Manitoulin Island in Northern Ontario, Canada. She is a second-year graduate student at the University of Texas at Arlington, studying for her master's in exercise science. Currently, she is also a graduate assistant and track and field coach. Shayla received her bachelor in sports science at Northern Michigan University of Marquette, and that's where she was born and raised. She ran collegiate track and was a member of various academic and volunteer groups. She graduated summa cum laude. Shayla's career aspirations are exploring opportunities worldwide that include sport performance, track and field, cross country, Native American communities, diversity and inclusion, and public health. Ooh, for Shayla. And we also have Samson Dewey, and his pronouns are he, him, and he is the president of the Native American Student Association at the University of Texas at Arlington. And he has been an active member for the previous 3 years of his Native Student Association. He is an industrial engineering junior and is Paiute from the Fallon Paiute Shoshone Reservation in Nevada. He currently lives in Fort Worth, Texas. He is active in the local Native community. He has helped organize the UTA Nassau's powwow for the last 3 years. He also helps out with his youth mentor group called Soar Beyond. He looks forward to graduating and starting the process to become an industrial engineering project manager. Okay, Samson. All right. And we have Dr. Colette Yellowrobe. Dr. Yellowrobe's culture and familiar background inspires her to create authentic strategies in education and leadership. She is an enrolled citizen of the Northern Cheyenne tribe in Montana, and she grew up in the Winnebago Reservation in Nebraska. She advocates to implement concrete changes, often in collaborative projects, as a co-creator on research, teaching, and community projects. Dr. Yellowrobe's scholar activism is often devoted to, and not limited to, the elevation of Indigenous epistemologies, knowledge, and pedagogies in education. Her life's journey is to actively engage in the long-standing and systemic structures that do not support diversity, and is actively engaged in inclusion and equity. Her various leadership roles in policy advising have often brought her back to honoring the past, present, and future Indigenous voices, continuous imagining of possibilities, and a commitment to center cultural practices. She also serves as a proud mother of 2 amazing sons, Chase and Mason. Woo-hoo. Thank you, Dr. Yellowrobe, and Ms. Tammy for giving that encouragement. And do we have Roxy? Did Roxy join us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Right,
I was like waiting for her. I was like, is she gonna forget about me?
Okay. We got you. All right, Roxy Sproul is a citizen of the Red Cliff Band of Ojibwe. She's a first-year undergraduate student at Michigan State University, and she's studying public policy, social work, and Indigenous studies. She is planning on working to transform the child welfare system, specifically how it affects Indigenous children through the Indian Child Welfare Act. She served as a panelist for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services Town Hall about reforming child services, a panelist for the 2019 discussion at Northern Michigan University about combating anti-Indian bias through education, and she gave a nationwide speech entitled Moving Beyond Whitewashed History. Currently, she's working on a research project with Michigan State University, conducting text and visual analyses regarding the content on marginalized communities and U.S. history textbooks from the newest edition of high school U.S. history textbooks. So please welcome Roxy Sproul. Woohoo! All right. So we are going to get started. Let me see if I can share this. Okay. Okay. So I have some questions for you as panelists, and just really appreciate your willingness to have this conversation and help us learn. So in thinking about your experiences, both as students and as faculty, I wonder what makes a university feel comfortable, safe, and welcoming.
I can start us off if you want. For me, I think one of the biggest things is having Native faculty and other Native students is so helpful. It goes such a long way with making me feel at home and making me feel like my experiences are valued. But we know that Native students in grad school are kind of rare. I'm one of two and in a school of 3,000. So it's not necessarily always going to be there. And I think another thing that's just really helpful is having good allies and other students of color and spaces that we can be ourselves in and talk about some of these systemic issues that are really present in graduate schools. So I think that's a lot of it. And also when you're bringing Native students into conversations like these, especially at the institutional level, really recognizing that you're putting these students sometimes in really uncomfortable spaces and asking them to talk about things that are really hard and difficult, like talking about systemic racism in an institution that you're at, especially as a grad student that may be funding you, is really uncomfortable because you're wondering, if I say this, are they going to take away my funding next year? Am I not going to get into the PhD program if I say this, So it's just kind of recognizing that some of these students are going through a lot, and asking us to talk about systemic racism within schools can be really difficult. And so if you're going to do that, really being intentional about creating a very safe space for us to do that, and making sure that there's just that we're comfortable and that we feel supported in those conversations. Thanks, Dr.
Yeah,
Shayla.
that's really important. Thank you, Tara. Others' experiences of feeling seen, feeling acknowledged and valued in that university space and in that learning environment.
So I can in here. Being able to identify with those other Native students on campus, like Tara was saying, being able to not necessarily even have a mentor-mentee program in place, but just to establish that there are other Native students on campus. For me personally, when I arrived to Western, outside of running into someone working at the bookstore, there was no real place for Native students to gather or, just kind of get together. And so that was huge for me, is being able to have those initial connections as an incoming freshman or transfer student, as well as once you get to campus, seeing artwork by Native people hung in prominent areas versus just kind of scattered throughout the library and back halls. Seeing Native artwork around campus when you first get there is such a relatively small thing that can go such a long way to show that not only are Native people accepted on the campus, but the campus is going the extra mile to promote those Native artists and really back the Native community in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important, because that representation, that positive representation in the physical space of the university is really important, and it goes a long way. It says something important.
I think another thing that helped us feel included was being invited to the table. They asked our opinions. I was on the presidential search committee. Just having a place that we could be included and our opinions mattered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is so important. Is that Dr. Yellowrobe? I can't see all of the people.
It's Paula.
It's Paula. Hey, Paula.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for joining us. Okay. Other perspectives.
I feel like my perspective is a little bit different than the other people who have spoken, because I'm a freshman in college and doing my undergraduate, and I'm in the middle of a pandemic where all my classes are online. So it is a little bit different for me and like the experiences that I've had. But so far, like the biggest thing or some of the most helpful things that have helped me, I guess, have been connecting with people like virtually. So at Michigan State University, we have an organization called the North American Indigenous Student Organization, or like shorter, it's just NASO. And NASO has been like a really awesome, like supportive group for me at least. And then so that's been really awesome. Like, and sometimes like with the people who do live in like the East Lansing and Lansing community, we can like meet up in small groups, social distanced. And so, like we did that more towards the beginning of the year. So that has been really helpful. And then I guess like more like in school wise, I've definitely struggled with this my first semester. I don't think I've ever felt so isolated as a Native student, even though I do have outlets like NASO. But I'm also in this program called the Social Science Scholars Program, and a couple of my one of my professors is on here from that. So shout out to Dr. Waller. But the Social Science Scholars Program has been really awesome for me to like be able to talk about my experiences and my issues within like the classes without feeling judged for it. My TA for my Sci 292 class is also here, so shout out to Michaela. But yeah, like being able to actually openly talk about my experiences in class has been really, really helpful. Because I feel like in some of my other courses, I feel really excluded from the curriculum, and then I don't have an opportunity to speak about that. Whereas in this program I do, and then there's like an offshoot little program called the Bridge Scholars Program from the Social Science Scholars, which is like just a group where like students of color can talk about their experiences within the program and just within Michigan State in general. And that has been really, really helpful, like just hearing from like upperclassmen their experiences and sort of like seeing where they're going in their lives, because a lot of them are more like seniors, and just seeing where they're going is like really awesome and like empowering for me as like a freshman. So yeah, I guess the biggest thing for me is like having a space for us to actually talk, especially within our courses.
Mhm. Thank you, Roxy. I appreciate that. Samson, would you be willing to share about that?
Yeah, so for me, when choosing UTA, I came from a small West Texas town. There wasn't a really big Indian community. It was just really me and my family. So when I was looking at colleges, I happened to come across an article from UTA talking about the powwow and talking about the Native American Student Association. And that's what pushed me to go to UTA, because one, it would let me continue to grow educationally and go to a school that's good with my major and stuff, but also connect back with the Indian community. And so not only was I able to do that, but we were able to learn more about like powwow stuff and all that. And for our group, we focus on not necessarily big topics, but just sharing information. So whether it's we have language workshops, whether we showcase a native director's movie, artwork, stuff like that, that's a big thing for us. And I know that helps pull people in and make them feel comfortable in a big school like UTA, because we have I think last count was like 55,000 students. Of course, most of them are online now, but even since before, just knowing that there's people just like you out there made it really comforting, knowing you can still talk to other people that came from this either the same or similar background from you.
Mm-hmm. That's really important. Thank you, Samson. Other perspectives?
I guess I will piggyback off what's been said already. With having like a space for Native students on campus has definitely makes a difference for Native students. At my previous school, there was an actual office for Native American students. I think it might be because also there's a program, so they have their own little department, and it was available for students to come in and use to study. Things of that nature. And at my current school, there isn't a space where students can come and study, but there is a Native American Student Association, which has definitely like greatly impacted my time here. Being so far from home, it was one of the first things I looked into. Is there a Native American student group? And that, like, really gratefully there was, and I reached out. So it definitely makes a difference with people, especially when you're so far from home in a different, maybe even being around different people. So I think that's really important to have something for students to find people that are like ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so important. And I think you raised some really, really key points. I'm wondering, kind of building off of what you shared, like how being far away from home for a lot of Native students, how do you maintain those cultural and family connections? You might be in an environment that is new and maybe challenging in different ways, but how is that possible?
I can start again. So I'm in Baltimore. I'm from Michigan. So it was definitely an adjustment. It was the first time I'd ever really like left my homelands for an extended period of time. So it was definitely a lot. A lot of our identities are land-based. So it was a lot for me to not be on my homelands. It was a tough decision to leave, but you know, I'm always coming back to Michigan. That's always the goal. But for me, the things that have really made it better is carrying my cultural role with me. So my clan is Snapping Turtle Clan. Snapping Turtle Clan is a lot of healing and teaching, and that's basically what I want to do long term, right? As a professor, I want to help heal my communities through research, and I want to teach other students and mentor other Native students. So really bringing that into the work I do in the classroom and in my research, that's really helped me to feel more like myself. But a big thing for me that really made Baltimore home was getting involved with the Baltimore Native community. So my research is actually with them. It's a community-based participatory research project around food security, but just showing up to their events and just listening and talking and being friends with them on Facebook and going out for coffee pre-pandemic with different people in the community and sharing foods. I'll trade wild rice for venison out here and things like that. That's really what made Baltimore feel more like home. And then through that, I was able to find a lot of other Native people that are my age living in Baltimore. We all hang out, or now I still hang out with my friends from Detroit on Zoom. And that's really helped make this easier because grad school is emotionally exhausting. And it's helpful to have those connections to remind you like why you even went here in the first place. So I think just remembering who you are is a big part of it for me.
Yeah, that's so important. Thank you. Dr. Yellowrobe, I wonder if you could speak to what makes a university safe, welcoming, comfortable, valuing from the perspective of a faculty member.
Well, I'm going to actually speak more to administrators on that.
Okay.
Because I think there's plenty of research to show that that's where a lot of improvements, a lot of opportunities are to be found in order to improve that sense of inclusivity. And I'll start with saying oftentimes natives were left out of graphs or data or some sort of data sets. And I think that's the first place to start, is removing us as the asterisks on tables and including us. And secondly, because we have small populations, which is a whole nother, question and a whole probably set of questions and conversations in itself, I would challenge or encourage our administrators to get to know their Native student populations, because they are indeed small enough, and then find ways to mentor students, because there probably will be low numbers of faculty, or for example, on my campus. However, that doesn't mean all of the labor needs to fall upon Indigenous faculty. That requires a team effort. So I look at that not from a deficit lens, I guess is what I'm trying to communicate to everybody. That is an opportunity where administrators need to grow and recognize that we were the original inhabitants. And then secondly, much to your amazing and beautiful land acknowledgement, Dr. Sherwood, do they have land acknowledgements? And I understand that those are critiqued as performative, I know. However, in itself, I can't remember who just said that, it was so beautifully put, that just seeing artwork is so critical. It's so important to start there. Is it at the central of your campus? What are your statues looking like? I think we all know after this past summer that we should be challenging those types of extremely racist and horrible statutes that have been deemed as legacy or as necessary on the campus. Thank you.
Yeah, that's so important. And it actually reminds me of an experience I had on a university campus. And I was in the student center and looking at pictures in the student center where lots of people gathered. And there was a series called Student Life, and they were black and white photos. And in one of the photos, it had pictures in the dorm, and it was a sink full of dirty dishes. And next to the sink was a like a squeegee, like dishwasher thing. And on the handle, it had a caricature, stereotypical American Indian, Plains Indian headdress with big nose and, you know, cartoon shape. And it was like the dishwasher, the dishwashing tool. And it was really kind of shocking at that point. And so it led to a conversation with multicultural affairs at the time and the art department. And eventually we were able to get that piece of artwork down. So that is kind of an example of that representation in artwork that is, you know, definitely going to send a message of being not welcoming. So I just wanted to share that. Can you talk about what factors influence your success as Native students? What's important?
I'll go ahead and start. So I know for me, like, of course, the biggest thing is knowing there's resources out there. Our group actually has a scholarship, and it's not limited just to Native Americans, but one of the qualifications in it is you have to be active in the Native American community, whether it's with our group itself, coming to our events, volunteering at events, or even helping in the community. We have a lot of Native American churches, or a big one is our Urban Intertribal Center. Dallas is one of the few places that was not necessarily a relocation center, but a place where the government kind of aided Native Americans to come and live in Dallas and use the resources here, get jobs here and stuff. And so using that and knowing there's resources, there's your healthcare, there's the scholarship, just knowing stuff like that is there is very vital. Just because then they know, even though they're not necessarily close to home, whether they're from Texas or from Nevada, from Michigan, anywhere they're from, they still have access to what they need to live.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Samson. That's so important. Other perspectives on what
when I came to Western as a freshman, I was adopted into a non-Native family, and I apologize. I know it's dark, but I just moved into this house an hour ago, and I need light bulbs, so I'm sorry. But so I was adopted into a non-Native family. Mm-hmm. So for me, and my situation, like if it wasn't for the Native American Student Organization on campus, like I don't think I would have made it, because it was really like my first real interaction with other Native people. And the group was amazing, and they really made me feel welcome, but not even just welcome. I felt like I was home. You know, when I was off camp, I was on campus away from like my house per se, but I finally felt like I was closer to being complete, you know what I'm saying? So we did a lot of things together. We learned together, and so it was my first real interaction and connection, and it was amazing to feel that sense of community for the first time. So I really owe it to the NASO group that we had, because I feel like they really shaped my entire life from that point.
Mhm. And thank you for all your work. And I just want to say, we didn't introduce Paula. Thank you for joining us. Paula is the former president of the Western Michigan University Native American Student Association, graduate of our nursing program. I believe you earned a master's degree at Western as well. Is that right, Paula?
I got a double bachelor's from Western.
Okay.
So I have my double bachelor's in nursing and community health education. I have my master's from University of Phoenix in business administration.
Okay.
And I'm currently a traveling nurse. And so my kids and I just got to the Twin Cities about an hour and a half ago. So we just moved
Wow.
in, and I'll start work on Monday.
That's awesome. Thanks for being with us in spite of all the important stuff that you're doing. So I'm wondering about, I want to go to the next slide. I'm wondering about what kind of assumptions that your peers make about you. And I have some imagery here. So I wonder if you could share a bit about some of the stereotypes or things that people assume about you that maybe you wish that they knew better.
Yeah, absolutely. I hate to keep starting, but I talk a lot. I'm very extroverted, so I'll start and then pass it to the rest of my colleagues. I think one of the biggest things is people think there's a right and wrong way to look Native. And a lot of that has to do with the ways we're portrayed in media and movies, and often by non-Native people in movies too, which is a whole nother problem we don't need to get into right now. But I often get the comment, but you have blue eyes. And I do have blue eyes, and my whole family has had blue eyes for 3-4 generations. And it's not like there's not a right and wrong way to look Native. Like, we don't exist for settler perceptions of what we think we should look like, and policing people's identity by what you think a Native person should look like is just so wrong on so many levels. So I think that's a big one. It's just there's 567 different like federally recognized tribes, and that's not even including the non-federally recognized tribes out there. And we're more geographically spread than all of Europe. But yet people say they can tell French people and Swedish people and German people apart by the way they look, but like all Native people are supposed to look exactly the same. So I would just really challenge, like, before you make a comment on a Native person's appearance, just like take a moment and think about it and like really sit with that, and just don't, like, there's just no reason to comment on the way we look. It's just not the best. And there's so many other things that I'm sure my colleagues can tell you about, but I'll pass it off to them for now.
Thank you, Tara.
Yeah, okay. I have a lot of thoughts about this one. So like, in a couple of my classes, I have to be careful, like Tara was saying, like, I'm not sure like how much I should say about my certain programs I'm in and stuff like that. But like, there are some classes that I've been in this semester where we're either portrayed like we don't exist at all, or my peers think that we don't exist at all, or I'm dismissed by my professors for talking about our experiences as Native people or my experiences as a Native person. And it has been really, really difficult to say the least, like trying to get through the semester with that sort of attitude, like continuously perpetuated. Like, and then like to go along with that, like something that I'm not comfortable with, which I know other Native people don't necessarily have a problem with, is when non-Native people call us Indians. And so I've been called Indian by like a couple professors now, and I don't necessarily feel comfortable with that. And so a lot of my issues haven't necessarily been with my peers as much as they have been so far with my professors, which has been very difficult because it's like this whole runaround game within the system where like, if I contact this person, then they're just going to tell me to contact this person, who's just going to tell me to contact that same person I just talked to. So it's just like, I don't know. It's just this like huge like runaround game. It's like something I guess with that is the fact that like, I guess like sort of with what Tara was saying, like I guess like perceptions of like non-Native people onto us Native people like have like aren't necessarily accurate, like things that they learn. I mean, that's obvious. Like a lot of things that we learn in media and history textbooks are clearly not completely accurate, but like continuing to enforce them when you actually meet a Native person and you have a Native person in your class, and continuing to enforce those like ideologies is really, really toxic, I feel like. And I definitely went through that a lot, and more of like the imagery when I was in high school, not necessarily like in college, especially since everything's online now, but like at my high school, like our mascot was the Redmond, and so I saw a lot of that negative imagery all the time. So yeah, I think like the biggest things is people still assume that we don't exist, and then when we do exist, you have to have Black hair and dark eyes and dark skin in order to be Native, in order to fit this like image that these people have like preset in their heads about us, which isn't necessarily and not really accurate at all. So
Thank you, Roxy.
I'll hop in here if I can.
Yeah, thank you.
So kind of to piggyback off of that, the assumption of what Native people are supposed to look like based off of the media's portrayal is a huge issue, even within my family. My siblings, my older brothers and my younger sister all look drastically different and, you know, more or less traditionally indigenous. And so even when we're out in public together, people will say like, I didn't think your brother was indigenous because he doesn't look it.
Mm-hmm.
We have the exact same parents. We have this more or less the same genetics, you know. So that assumption that Natives are supposed to look a specific way is very detrimental to a lot of people's acceptance of themselves as a Native person. And to kind of switch it up a little bit, assumptions I have faced that I found particularly aggravating were a lot of my peers assumed that because I was Native, A, I drank, and B, I'm good at drinking. And both of those things are horribly untrue. I can't do alcohol. I'm 22, I've experimented, not my thing. And I'm really not good at it. So that stereotype that Natives are drinkers and that's what they do, you know, day in, day out kind of thing that's just 100% not who I am. And so it feels like I'm having identities portrayed onto me, you know, upon the first, oh yeah, I am Native. And then another assumption made that it doesn't necessarily bother me, but it's one that does come up fairly often, is that I'm from the reservation because I'm Native, in which I'm an urban Indian, to use the vocabulary used in previous meetings. And so for me, it feels almost delegitimizing to how Indigenous I am, because I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, even though my dad was the director of the American Indian Center of Chicago. And so I spent my entire youth hanging out with the Indigenous population of Chicago. But to have that sense of delegitimization because of I'm not from a reservation, or the assumption that I should be from a reservation because I'm Native, is one that I've found pretty consistently throughout a lot of universities.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Tristan.
I just wanted to hop on one more thing because I don't think any of my colleagues have touched on it yet. There's also this idea that like Native people go to school for free, and like I don't know where that comes from. Like genuinely not sure where that one came from, but I certainly didn't go to school for free. I don't know about other people on this call, and nobody needs to divulge that information because genuinely it's nobody's business who pays for your school. But people frequently ask me like, oh, so you go to school for free? And I'm like, no, that's not a thing really, especially not when you're going to school out of state. And then the other thing too is when I got into Johns Hopkins, there was a lot of people and really well-meaning, good friends that were like, well, of course you got into Hopkins, you're Native. And I'm like, what does that even mean? To like reduce all of my hard work, all of my undergrad achievements to my racial identity was super harmful. And if the admissions committee really did let me in on race, that's a terrible thing. And I don't want to be at this school. But like the reason I got in is between me and that admissions committee and nobody else. So saying things like that, and like even well-meaning people say things like that without thinking about like what I think about when I hear that. And so just thinking about, like, if you're going to say something about somebody being Native and their academic achievements, I don't think it should be, I think you should really think about it before you say it, because we work just as hard as our non-Native counterparts, if not harder, to get to where we are. But yeah, and then also, I don't know if all my colleagues got a chance to talk, but.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'd like to add a little bit more to what's already been said. So I definitely can relate to certain aspects of what's been said, but furthermore, I think also one thing that impacts me with assumptions is like how cultural you may be. For myself, I grew up in a non-Native household, so my family did try to immerse me as a child, or make sure that we were involved in stuff. So I'm really grateful for that. And I grew up, like wanting to be involved, learn more about who I am and stuff like that. And it's really harmful when maybe I'm in university at class, or like my old teammates even, or some people would just like say, oh, you're white, or maybe because I wasn't, I don't know, being cultural enough for them. I don't know. It's like, I guess that's assumption that's really harmful to someone who is trying to who's on their own journey with trying to figure out who they are and things of that nature. And my my band is in Canada, so I visited for the first time a couple years ago. So it's hard to kind of really get to know my family and stuff when I'm actually now in Texas. So I'm very far. That's one thing that's really harmful. And then I guess another thing I'd like to touch on was, in school, I helped out a lot with the powwows and stuff, and I received some harmful comments about what a powwow is and things from my peers. And I guess, I don't know, I don't really know where I'm going with this, but just the stereotypes of what it is, or who, how it should go, or things of that nature, I guess have impacted me, and this is so recent in my life.
Thank you, Shayla. I think that's so important. And it does, I think about all of the hundreds of years of structural violence and policies, both genocidal, culturally genocidal, the boarding schools, all of the assimilationist policies, and then to kind of throw that back in your face and say, oh, well, you're not Native enough. When there was this whole trajectory of structural violence to erase and replace Native people with white culture as particularly harmful. Dr. Yellowrobe, would you like to add to this question?
Sure, but I have a housekeeping. My educator's coming out. From Jonathan, raised his hand. Are we taking questions, or how are we facilitating those?
I think that is a good question. I think I would like to have questions at the end, if that's okay. Is that okay?
Sure. Or can we put them in chat too?
Yeah. Yeah. Do we have a chat open, Ms. Candace?
And this is a chance to breathe, everybody, right? Take a drink.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can proceed. So, I'm sitting here very challenged. And first of all, I want to acknowledge the phenomenal, my panelists, co-panelists, and colleagues. I'm going to be brutally honest with each of you. When I was in undergrad, I don't quantify after a certain age. I'm just gonna let everyone know that, pro tip there. But over 2 decades ago, I am appalled to hear some of the things that you're still experiencing. You could almost verbatim go back to when I was on campus, on an undergrad campus, which tells me that we must employ those who are trying to work in allyship with us to really examine why they're continuing to actively operate in such a deficit negative mindset of our peoples. So I want to really thank you for sharing that. That's good to remind me. That being said, I say that because you need to understand that I'm a different place in my career, different positionality as well. As a Cheyenne woman, and when each of you get to that level of MD, PhD, EDD, whatever you choose to pursue, you will see how small we are. We are more rare than a unicorn, as they would say. So be very proud of who you are. So an assumption that I actively check is we also have a political and legal status in this country. And I will not let my colleagues and peers forget that at all. And we must have a seat at each and every diversity inclusion table that is going on right now. We must be there. Now, as a woman, as a Shine woman, I think the biggest assumption that I operate against, or I have to actively remind people, just as soon as yesterday in a meeting with colleagues, non-Native colleagues, that I am not the stereotypical quote unquote Land O'Lakes butter stereotype. I am not the romantic Native American woman that you dreamed up in your American psyche. I will speak up, I will speak back, and I will check your ego actively, because you are operating in a negative deficit and highly inaccurate education about our peoples. And this is everywhere. You know, I'm in a completely different state and part of the region, and this is consistent, even on the coast as well. These stories are so similar. So I encourage each of you who are, you know, especially Native women in the academy, you do not have to conform or change your voice in order to be heard. That would be probably the biggest assumption. And thank you for the opportunity to answer that, Dr. Shirley.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, very compelling. And I think I would like to move to the next question. I did want to point out the diorama here. I don't know how many of you panelists had to make a Native American artifact or a diorama or an ancient something or other in your K through 12 education. I found when my son came home with that project, I needed to come and have a conversation about appreciating the effort that she was making around diversity and inclusion, but also that, you know, she was shaping the thinking and the schemas of every student in that classroom, and in a past tense artifact in the past activity for the kids to do isn't maybe the best learning experience. And so I encouraged her to include examples of contemporary Native scientists, artists, astronauts, actors, artists, etc. And she was more than willing and open to do that. I think a lot of teachers just want the resources, and the textbooks aren't very helpful. So I just wanted to share that. Does anyone have a comment about having to make one of those dioramas?
Yeah, I have something like, oh wait, no, Samson, you can go.
Yeah, I was going to speak on just like what they teach in school. They always want to paint us as like a cookie cutter type of person, and none of us are that. Like, I have the last name of Dewey, and so people always ask, oh, why don't you have the Native American last name? I even was on a different panel where I spoke to a college level class where I would just told people my story, then they asked questions about me. Some of them even still assume just most Native Americans nowadays still live in teepees. Not all of them knew that that's not what we do now. Some of them didn't even know that there was other forms of housing and stuff that people lived in. They just assumed what they saw on TV or what they learned in the textbooks. And that's another big thing, is they don't teach everything in the textbooks that's correct. They leave it all the generalizations. They don't like specify even regions. Because like I grew up in Texas public schools, and none of it was like specific to the Native Americans in this area or even in the state of Texas. It was all just generalization. So that's what people grow up and learn to assume about us.
Thank you, Samson. Anyone else want to share?
I was just going to add like one more thing sort of about like, sort of related to this diagram and just like assumptions in general. So like I have a few friends, and like personally I've experienced this as well, like in K-12 education specifically, where like I have one friend who told me this story where she's a white passing Native. She has red hair, she has blue eyes, but there was one lesson where her teacher was talking about Native Americans and like saying that Native Americans have dark hair, dark eyes, dark skin. And she stood up and she's like, I'm Native. And her teacher put her in timeout and was like, no, you're not. You can't stand up and say lies like that. And I have another friend who's had like really similar experiences, which I think is so messed up. And like, that's really where we need to start, is like really within, like, what is our, what kind of education are the K-12 teachers and our professors getting as well? Like, that's going to continue to perpetuate all of these assumptions and these stereotypes. And then another thing that like, or two more quick things I like notice is like the stereotype, like it's within these pictures as well, is that we're like savages, which isn't true, that we're like not civilized, when clearly if a lot of people on this panel are like urban natives, then it's like kind of contradicts that assumption in general. And then like on my first day of one of my classes for college, I said that I like doing beadwork. And he had to report back to the group, like with the fun fact that I had, which was that I like beadwork. And he told everyone that I like feathering. So there's that other assumption that like we have to have the like a big headdress and be wearing buckskin and feathers in order to be Native, you know? And then another thing that I notice a lot within my education and like my peers in general is the whole like, it's monolithic language that really, really irritates me. So like when we talk about the Native American community, like, no, there's over 573 federally recognized tribes. There are more than just one community. And so you can't continue to perpetuate language like that, because that's going to continue this notion that we're all one people with no distinction between ourselves, which isn't accurate, because I'm different from a Plains Native. You know what I mean? So yeah, those are a lot of like, I guess like more of the assumptions that I see.
Thank you, Roxy. So we're kind of edging toward this concept of microaggressions, and some of you may have some familiarity with this term. But again, as has been mentioned, Native people are narrowly represented in media, film, and books. And so moving from those assumptions that we've talked about into our social interactions with people, as those assumptions come out in conversation, it can produce kind of a visceral response, a devaluing or delegitimizing, as Tristan said, response. And racial discrimination is a stressor. It's a trauma trigger. Microaggressions, especially in the healthcare context, can undermine trust in providers. In the educational context, can undermine engagement and student success. So this is something I think that is requires us to be courageous in our conversation. I want to just move to some quick definitions. Sometimes microaggressions can come from a place of curiosity that is not a ill-intended comment, that comes out of a space of not knowing. When you're on the receiving end of a microaggression, sometimes the response is, you're too sensitive, you're pulling the race card, you're overreacting. The mascots are really intended to honor you, so I don't understand why you're so upset, right? But there is this cumulative pile-on of microaggression and assumptions over your lifetime. And so that there's a relationship between this broader pattern of oppression and discrimination. So let's talk about Native humor. I thought that this was one way to respond to microaggressions, and some folks that are participating may or may not be familiar with the CNN election poll and the whole something else. But I'm curious, I see some head nods and some smiles. If you could share your perspective. I know these memes blew up all over Facebook, and I picked kind of two of them. I mean, there are some that were really really sharp and really hilarious, but I picked a couple of them. I'm just curious as to what your response is to the whole something else as regarding the election exit polls.
So I participated in the several mascot issue fights at the different local high schools, and I was told all kinds of things. But I think one that really stuck out to me was when the local pastor, who had his white collar on, stood up and told me to shut up and keep my opinion to myself, and if not, he was going to tar and feather me and run me out of town. And that was like 2 years ago. So I'm like, wow, okay, what year is this again? So but to go with the something else, I agree. The humor has to be there, because I think otherwise you have to be able to deal with the atrocities somehow. And if not humor, you're just going to rip your hair out or drive yourself insane. So I think the humor is absolutely necessary. And we're really good at it. We've really perfected that coping mechanism. So yes, I completely agree.
Big Witch, Paula.
The whole week, like after the whole something else thing, we have a group chat for NASO where usually we send like TikToks and memes and stuff like that on Instagram, and we changed our name to the something else meme group. And so we were just sending memes for days, like this sort of stuff. And it was definitely a way to like, make us feel better about the situation, and to like, we could like, we knew it was like a safe place for us to like make light of the situation, and then also like complain about it if like we needed to, or like vent about it, I guess is a better word. But yeah, no, like I definitely try to use humor to cope with a lot of different things. Like it's healing for me to be able to, talk with other people who understand it in a way that I can joke about it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm with other people who actually understand what like the humor behind it, So
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Just going off what they said too, I think it's just humor helps people understand sometimes how ridiculous the questions they're asking are. Like they're like, oh, which side of your family is Native? I'm like, okay, so which side of you is German? What percentage are you? Can you give me to 3 decimal places? Like, you know what I mean? Or if somebody's like, how Native are you? I'm like, oh, just my left arm. And people are like, what? I'm like, oh, it's just my left arm. Like, just the left side of my body. Don't worry about it. You know what I mean? So I think sometimes like humor is just, it's truly like part of Indigenous people's like lives and the way we cope with things. And my favorite are the commodity cheese jokes. So a lot of our families grew up on those commodity foods, and there's these like bricks of cheese that I don't even think they had to be refrigerated, right? They were just like foil. I remember eating them as kids. And so like the commodity cheese jokes are what get me. But humor is definitely a big part of who we are, and like how we get through these weird situations of like systemic racism where we're still not being counted in a lot of ways. So
yeah, thank you, Tara. Anything else about something else?
I like the way Tara said that, or I forget who said it, of it kind of, making jokes of the situation of like something else kind of puts into perspective sometimes how ridiculous the questions can sound. And, within indigenous communities, the memes of something else blew up like no other. But I actually just had a phone call with my friend from the University of Illinois yesterday, because she was asking about just some general topics about being Indigenous, and I had brought up these memes of something else because CNN was displaying them pretty openly, and she had no idea that even happened. And so even within the microaggressions we're facing, it's easy for people to say, oh, well, you're being sensitive about it because they never even saw the initial post of something else. And so just kind of the microaggressions being very targeted and then hidden from broader masses, kind of. Not that it was necessarily hidden on CNN, but how they quickly stopped using the something else phrase and switched it back provides that those microaggressions to continue, because once again, the broader masses weren't even aware that that happened, while we're all over here making memes left and right about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Tristan. Shayla, did you want to share?
I basically just agree with like what everyone else said. Even more recently, I started finding myself like joining Native groups on social media sites. And I feel like just little things like that, with like the memes and the relatableness and like finding humor in things, I think, I don't know, somehow helps in a way. And not to like say that things don't matter at all or anything, or that we shouldn't still fight for certain things. But I do think it is important at one point to start looking at more like positive things and like making light of certain things, even though I know it's like some topics are really hard and deep. But yeah, I guess that's just a little bit of my perspective on that.
Thank you. Dr. Yellerobe?
Yeah, I'm trying to decide. This was funny. It was hilarious. And I think we have some of the best wit and humor on earth. Like I go total big or go home. I also think that like what I thought of everybody is, it's so hard to find, besides our people who get me with that humor. It's either they get it or they can't. So that's where I just adore our humor. And a story to share. When I was called something else by my mother, by my aunties, it's still a badge of honor for me. So I guess I take it I was always going to be that kid growing up. So, and for those of us that I did grow up on the res, it's just something about res humor. So whoever brought up commods, I just started thinking back and I'm laughing hysterically internally. I just didn't want to look weird on camera to everybody, right? So I just think that is so important for us to keep. And I know it's dark. I've heard that it's kind of dark and sarcastic or whatever, but it's really our own thing. And I proudly own that for each of us. So if you don't want it, I'll take it.
Mm-hmm. Big witch. Samson, did you want to share on this one? I don't remember if you already did.
So I know they've spoken a lot about something else, but living in Texas, one of the big things here is football, especially in this area. The number one team is obviously the Dallas Cowboys to most people, and their rivals are the football team in Washington. So we get, at least I personally see a lot of people trying to like use the term Redskins still and not realizing what it means. And so to add to the humor of it, seeing the t-shirt of the Bomani Jones on ESPN wearing the Caucasian shirt with the white guy with the $sign pointing up, to me that was like really funny, just because I knew what it was trying to get at, but not everybody took it as offensive. But it's like, do you not see right over here, this football team, 2 baseball teams, a hockey team, all these are trying to do the same thing, yet you get mad when it's you, when it's against you and not against somebody else. Mm-hmm. And so that, for me, that's one of the big ones, just because I see it all the time.
Yeah, just pointing out that irony and that contradiction, you know, and kind of that dark, maybe even snarky humor. I've seen the different like sandwiches, like grilled cheese you can make with commodity cheese with like hot sauce and different, you know, just funny pictures of food and stuff like that. And you know, it is about being resilient and that constant cumulative effect of things like this. So I think we're going to move to questions here in a minute. I want to close up this part of the panel to say, you know, what, well, it'll be a 2-part question. You can answer both or one part. So what do you wish that your peers and your faculty knew? What do you wish that if there was one thing that was missing that would be important for them to understand about Native people. And then for those who are here and they're interested in learning and becoming involved, how could they be a good ally? How could they move into that space of being an ally and a accomplice, maybe, or a collaborator?
Oh, I guess my mic was on. Sorry about that. Sitting over here thinking to myself. I guess one of the biggest things for being a good ally is attempting to disregard all of those assumptions you have, whether you realize they're there or not. Because a lot of those assumptions that a lot of people have about Indigenous people are from history books that are written incorrectly, popular media that misportrays us, and a lot of times little assumptions that you might not realize you have will detour someone because they're feeling that microaggression coming from you. And so really trying to step back and relearn kind of about Indigenous communities, and more specifically about the Indigenous person themselves, because as we've kind of talked about here today, no Indigenous person is the same as another.
Yeah, that's so well said. Thank you, Tristan.
Can go next. I think just piggybacking off of what Tristan just said is just like really getting to know the person. And people often say to me, like, don't Native people believe this? And again, there's 567 different tribes and we all have different beliefs and different cultures. And I don't speak for my own tribe of 33,000 people. So why would I speak for all Native people? You know what I mean? So just recognizing that like there's not a lot of, people like to think of us as this homogenous group that all looks the same, acts the same, and that's just totally not true. So just getting to know the person. But I think one of the biggest things with being a good ally is in public health, I see it all the time where people want to rush to action. Like everybody wants to do something, but I would challenge you, instead of rushing to act or react, rushing to understand. And so taking a moment to sit, to listen to Native podcasts or read Native news articles or read Native books, and sit with that understanding and talk to the Native people in your area, talk to Native people you know, and then sit with that understanding and then move forward with how you can support Native communities. And really, a lot of it comes from listening. Like we often get spoken over. So there's a lot of Native experts or Native anthropologists out there that get chosen for conferences that there's Native people that are just as well qualified. Well, actually not just as well, definitely better qualified to speak on these topics, but still they choose these non-Native experts. So just taking a moment to like listen to understand, and then knowing when to pass the mic is such an important thing. And with that, I will pass the mic to my colleagues because I've talked a lot tonight.
Miigwech.
I was just going to say like the same thing as Tara. I was going to say like the thing that I would tell my professors and faculty is that we're still here and we don't exist as a monolith. And I know the term "we" sounds sort of exclusive in and of itself, but Indigenous peoples are diverse just as any other racial or ethnic group is. So yeah, recognizing that within curriculum and recognizing that within classes is super essential. For accomplishship or like allyship, I've been trying to figure this out a lot because my friends always ask me like what they can do, but in some ways, like sort of what Tara was saying, like some people often like jump onto the issues right away. And so I urge people to, you know, take a step back and like actually listen to the communities that are speaking out already. And another thing that I think I'm going to urge people to do is, instead of like going straight to a Native person whenever you have a question about Indigenous cultures or Indigenous identities, like if it's a simple question, you can Google that. Like, I don't need to tell you that college is not free for Native people. So like, if it's simple questions like that, that is honestly really draining, because like microaggressions in general are draining, but like the constant questions like that, like I understand it comes from a great place, but like it takes, like, you gotta recognize when you should be like asking these types of questions to Native people, you know what I mean? So I guess that's my piece of advice.
Mhm. Thank you, Roxy.
I'll go ahead and add to what they said. So I think I know there's two questions, but they kind of like come into their own in a way. Biggest thing to be an ally is just be willing to learn. Like, it don't matter like what it is, whether it's like the actual culture of whoever you're talking to, language, going to different Native American events, going to powwows, enjoying, like, taking in what's going on at powwows and the other events, but mostly just listening, learning, and be willing to adapt too. Don't be set in your ways, just like the mascot stuff. A lot of people, especially the quote unquote fans of the teams and stuff, they don't want the names to change, but they have to understand that those names are offensive not only just to a few people, but a whole race of people. So it's more than just being there and talking to somebody. You got to be willing to learn and listen and change any assumptions you've had.
Mm-hmm. Rich. Would anyone like to add? I would just say for myself, one of the things that I wish people knew more about, I guess it's twofold, is one, the total erasure and general ignorance about the boarding school era, which started in 1879 and ended with the last closure of the residential schools for Native children at Harbor Springs, Michigan in 1983. And that whole era of policy focused on cultural erasure and prohibiting language and culture and spirituality, and that, you know, that was part of a broader strategy of assimilation. And if you don't understand that as a health clinician or health practitioner, you are missing a very important piece. And the other piece, which has already been touched on, is especially in health and public health, is we hear a lot about disparities and negatives, and that tendency to create a deficit identity versus recognizing the strength and the resilience that is needed to resist, you know, those hundreds of years of policies and racism and oppression, that there is such resilience in Native communities, and that often is a missing piece. Well, I am going to open it up for questions.
Can I add something real quick to that? I was just going to say, I think one thing for anybody when they're asking questions of a Native American person is to just understand, especially with elders, that there's a processing time. Like, I know there's, especially with the younger generations, that everything's instant responses, and there's a tendency to jump the gun and just think, oh, well, they're not going to answer me, or they're ignoring me, or they didn't hear me, when really it's just they need processing time and they're trying to come up with the best answer. So sometimes the best way to learn is just to, always is to just listen, you know, give them time, wait for a response, you know, be respectful. and understand that if they're not necessarily making eye contact, that doesn't mean that they're ignoring you or that you're not important to them. Just that's not always culturally a thing. So, just a little tidbit.
Thank you, Paula.
I'd like to ask a question very quickly because I literally have to walk out the door when it's done being answered. It's for Colette, if you're willing. There is a need for advocacy for Native American inclusion in our community. I'm in Marquette, Michigan, where Roxy was from and where Northern's campus is. How do we keep people with a white savior complex out of this, or to keep that from speaking in? There's such a tendency to speak over the people as opposed to allying with them. How do we prevent that?
That's an excellent question, Dr. Taylor. And that's been a consistent theme that I've seen in my work. So my first suggestion would be that you have to understand how, this may sound odd, but how the circumstances of colonialism and racism and patriarchy, classism, because they intersect. So you have to understand the intersectional lines that are being drawn in your area and your community, because it requires having courageous conversations with persons who are doing that. And I think we all know that higher ed, definitely higher ed perpetuates that. That is rampant with that. Researchers or non-natives making careers off our people. It's called extractive research. And so in that sense, I said very boldly earlier, check egos, which is a very blunt way of saying it, but this requires, I teach interpersonal skills, which is going to sound like a complete contradiction in itself right there. I'm trying to make you guys laugh too, because it's hard work, and you have to engage people, and of course not necessarily be afraid to bring that enlightenment to someone. And I want to add this because, and I'm not critiquing anyone, but where I had to own this in my career, and it totally changed where I was going, is I had to understand how I was colonized in the academy. I had to own that and overcome it. Because if we don't start to understand that ourselves as Native professionals, practitioners, or whatever, we actually will perpetuate systems of oppression as well. And I like how some of us are being very brave and not being afraid to challenge status quo anymore. So my point to you, Mr. Taylor, Dr. Taylor, is where are the power dynamics in your community? That's going to be a lot of the places to start and engage. Quite frankly, I don't tell people, especially persons of color, administrators of color, do not go alone. You need to go with someone, students as well. Have someone with you as well. First generation students, take someone with you, because that can become very daunting. And I think he should get a hand for that question. That's often an elephant we're not calling out in our community. So thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you. I have to run, but one last thing. Thank you for thinking doctor. I'm not Dr. Taylor. I'm a gentleman with a disability who just happens to be an activist, so thank you.
That's such a good question. Thank you so much. So I'm opening up the chat, and I see we have a lot of great comments.
Yeah, can we acknowledge the student at Chapel Hill? Shout out. I'm a Duke fan though, just to put that out there. I think it was a he, I'm sorry, I'm assuming, but an excellent point. Something I encourage our people in I say trying to walk in allyship, because we determine that as the Native communities or tribal communities. You don't get to, that's not a badge. That's that kind of culture that we went through in schooling, right? I agree with what they stated about ask people to go back to where they grew up. If you grew up at Marquette or wherever that gentleman was just from, okay, what were the tribes? There's so many amazing maps now. Obviously, Canada has really set the bar high for each of us. So I want to acknowledge that comment because I appreciate him, or he or she, sorry, again, contributing.
So also we had Melissa Lewis. She wrote, what should universities do to make safer learning environments for Native students?
I'm so glad we wanted to talk about this one because I have a perfect one. So at Johns Hopkins, we're the #1 school of public health. We are known to lead in a lot of ways. And in my entire first year of classes, anytime racial disparities were brought up, Native data wasn't on the slide. And so I became infamous for, in my 500 person classes, raising my hand and saying, where is my data? Why do I not matter? And it's so dehumanizing to have everybody else's data up there but yours. And so that's just a concrete step you can make as a university to just make a statement. Say, if you don't have Native data, that should be acknowledged as a limitation, and saying, you don't have Native data because you didn't do your study right, and you didn't sample right, or we don't have Native data and that is a problem. Because even just acknowledging that is what helps move the field forward and helps students think through, okay, well, who's missing from this conversation and whose data is missing? So that would be my big thing that makes me feel safer in a classroom, is when my data is on the slides.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Tara.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of to go along with that, like another thing, and sort of to go along with like what Colette was saying earlier about like extractive research. A lot of times we, like in my experience, we read books authored by like white cis men about communities of color, which I think is like a huge problem in and of itself, because like Colette was saying, that's like more of like extractive research. And one thing that I would like to see a lot more is Indigenous authored books like being presented within the curriculum. I feel like that would be like a better way to go about like you know, teaching our histories, and then also be like share a more contemporary side of it as well, because we are so like portrayed as like living in the past. So yeah.
So also too, I would like to make a comment about what Melissa, Dr. Dixon and I had this rich conversation with Northern Michigan yesterday. And one of the things, the conclusion from our meeting, because we're going to do more work, is that we really want to provide a traditional Native American course that focuses on medicine, traditional medicine. You know, how, you know, traditional medicine and Western medicine work together. So we're going to be putting together, Dr. Dixon doing this wonderful health summer in June, and we're going to, from that data, we are hoping, we really want hoping to get a rich data so we can put these courses together. So here at WMed, we really are continuing to wanted to engage, and we don't want to save the Native American community. We want them to teach us how we can be better allies for them. So this is something that Dr. Dixon and I are really adamant about bringing different cultures to the table. And we just didn't want to do a Native American celebration, then 12 months come back and, you know, do something else. We want this to be active. So this is the first of many engagement with Dr. Sherwood leading the charge with us in Northern Michigan and some other allies on our campus to really provide more support for Native Americans.
Yeah, and I want to say also to go off of Tara's point about disparities, reporting the disparities is not enough. That's the other thing that we're beginning to look at our curriculum and looking at how we're portrayed in books in medicine, because in the medical school, often they get the disparities and lists of disparities, and that's it. You know, high blood pressure is in African Americans and Native Americans, diabetes. And then there's the end of the story. And that cannot be the end of the story. So part of also, we've got some very proactive students who are actually attending. You know, we're actually going to be doing, and we are critically evaluating our curriculum, looking at the books and going beyond just reporting a disparity to say the reason behind it, and then what do we need to be doing to actually change that? Because I think that has to happen. I'm sorry, allergies.
That's so important. Thank you, Dr. Dixon. Other questions? There's a lot in the chat here.
Really quick to add on that previous note of how to become or how to be more welcoming. Developing / creating a curriculum based on Native Indigenous issues and or related topics, because issues is, you know, a negative way of looking at it. So I'll use the word topics instead. But when there are those classes established, really promoting those classes. Because I know at Western, I received a lot of encouragement to take like African American studies classes, Asian studies classes, which is, you know, Asian studies is still a very broad term. But I had to find the 2 classes on Native culture that I could by myself and enroll in them. No one really promoted them to me, even though I was very open about I'm an Indigenous student. So promoting the curriculum that is there and attempting to better the curriculum that is in place.
That's an excellent point. Thank you, Tristan.
One thing that I would contribute, again, this is probably more directed at administrators. There seems to be an active exclusion of Indigenous voices going on with anti-racism work, and that's entirely problematic and unacceptable. So that would be my first place to start. How are you and I'm speaking right now in present time. I'm not talking about curriculum. I'm not talking about anything else. It's about centering Indigenous voices, and then also understanding that that does not mean we are excluding other groups. So that very Western, competitive, highly individualistic division is at the core of many strategies that I've seen going on. And they want to go straight to outreach or strategy or promotion, you know, to speak the language that most of you are working in or studying to be in. And of course, education is doing this. My profession is not exempt at all, because then you're just treating the, and it will become a deficit approach, because you're just looking at how to retain instead of understanding that retention is the second you start recruiting Native American students. It is the second you step on a tribal community. So this means everybody from your provost, chancellor down to your recruiter must have core Native American training. Just has to start there, which means you will receive a lesson in humility. I think some of you are brave for admitting that you've talked to some of our elders. That's very brave of you. But I guess I would want to challenge that and ask, how did you get introduced? What was that first meeting like? I actively tell people, when you enter space with me, Native American space, buckle up, because you are not going to be spared any hurt feelings when I totally dismantle your stereotypical figments. So I think that's very, very brave.
I love that, Dr. Yellow Robe. Buckle up. Other questions?
So there's another question that says, what about modern events, native events, such as the mascot Standing Rock, purposeful displacement of Native Americans, deconstruction of the burial grounds, and the like on the southern border? How do Native American students get first and guidance, particularly when they're away from their homeland? So I guess this question is asking, what do you guys feel about, all these current events that's taking place and that are still occurring? Like, a lot of times, I guess we as, we think about history, we think about these things happening hundreds of years ago when they're still happening today. So.
I think that's a tough question. I think as students, our time is all very limited. Like any college student, grad student, is so incredibly busy. And then Native American Heritage Month just happened, and I think I did 6 panels last month. Like, it was crazy on top of my grad school work and my full-time work. And so it's exhausting. There's all these modern events that need our attention. And so for me, it's kind of picking my battles. Like, I can't be involved in every single movement as one person. So it's picking the ones that I can be involved in and be emotionally invested in, and promoting those through my social media advocacy, and also I mean, academic papers don't do much. I will admit that. They are sometimes not the best things, but writing from a strengths-based perspective to bring attention to the strength that's happening through these movements. In Standing Rock, we saw such an incredible display of community solidarity. And in COVID, we've seen such amazing examples of how communities have come together to feed each other and to prevent COVID and do things in like innovative ways that the rest of the country isn't doing, and using their tribal sovereignty to stop the spread of COVID, which is a really cool example of how sovereignty can, you know, change the narrative in some ways. But it's tough. Like as a student, like I can't be involved in everything. Sometimes I get messages like somebody was like, oh, you didn't post something about Thanksgiving. And I was like, yeah, well, I don't exist to please settlers, so I'm not going to post on everything. Sorry. And it's exhausting to do that constantly. But I think for me, like how I kind of keep grounded and listen to teachings is as much as I can, I try to have Zoom calls, phone conversations with people from my home community and people here in Baltimore. Other than that, just being outside is huge for me. Like I try to be outside as much as I can and just take moments to just be and not think, just be where I am for a moment. But I'm sure my other fellow colleagues have a lot more to say about how they keep in contact.
Mhm. We like your quote, Tara.
I'm going to add on to that a little bit. So Casey was actually part of our group. He is one of our last president, actually, of our group. But he was talking about Standing Rock and stuff. And one of the big things for not only our group, but our school is Kelsey Warren, who is the owner of the company that's funding and doing the pipeline. I forgot what it's exactly called, but their headquarters is actually located in Dallas, which is just down the street from our campus. And on top of that, he's on the board for our university, for the UT system. And so he has a big hand in what we can do. And so as a Native group, we weren't necessarily allowed to speak on stuff just because it would get too political, and we couldn't. It was hard for us to go around those lines with the university. But as an individual, I was able to connect with people in our group and not only go to protests, but help share information about what's going on. Just like going to the protest was a big one, just because you got to meet a lot of Native Americans in the community and got to see what they were doing. And then even nowadays we see them. I've seen multiple posts, especially recently with Indigenous Peoples Day. We have a member in our group right now. His name is Albert. He has helped change multiple cities from denouncing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. So for me, I would say just collaborating with people is one of the biggest things you can do.
Thank you, Samson. Any other closing thoughts?
Yeah, about that specific question, like I'm not sure like where the direction is with it, like whether or not like what we felt about those issues or like discussing the issues within universities, but the latter is the side that I'm gonna go with. So I feel like in a lot of my classes, like these issues, like modern issues, historical issues, none of the above are brought up really ever. And so my way of dealing with that is like always, which also has its side effects, but is like always trying to like at least put it in somewhere. I was part of a talk like a few weeks ago where one of the people asked us like, what do you do to like reclaim your indigeneity in your daily life? And one of my friends said that he writes every single one of his papers for his classes about being Native, and that's just what it like helps him cope with being in like a predominantly white institution. And I can definitely see myself doing that. I've done that a couple times now, where like I use writing as like in the essay writings that I had to do. I have like 2 to 3 essays a week, and I'll like usually denote like one of them to my experience as like an Indigenous person, or at least like weave in something about like Indigenous sovereignty or like tribal sovereignty within whatever I'm writing about. But at the same time, when I do that, and like when I do bring those issues up in class, I do become tokenized, where people only come to me when they have a question about something. or they put me on a pedestal for being so strong for speaking up about my experiences, which like I know I'm strong for speaking up about my experiences. I know I'm resilient. But to continuously like put me on this pedestal like I'm somehow better than everyone else is sort of in itself patronizing and dehumanizing. So I guess that's like a double-edged sword, that entire question. But yeah, I try to sort of do what Tara does in her classes where I'm like, well, what about us, you know? But that does have its side effects sometimes. So it is pretty tricky to figure out. I think like the source of change definitely comes from the administration and sort of this like top down thing, so that every single person in the institution knows that we still exist and that we have modern day issues just like everyone else.
And I think
Dr. Sherwood, I wanted to, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me for interrupting. I want to, I'm thinking about how to say this because I know most of our tribes, you know, we're collective. It's not proper to, you know, be very individual. However, in my experience, I have found that it is more important to express very deeply. So I'm going to speak to each of you who have been on this panel, that I am so proud of you. And I'm not trying to be condescending, I'm being dead serious. You are being phenomenal leaders and you are oftentimes not promoted. And that has to stop. Because the inroads that I've seen small Native American student groups make across the country in predominantly white institutions or wherever is phenomenal. And to be able to quantify that and put that into a dollar amount would really blow the minds of many economists. I've seen, yes, I'm for compensation, but at the spirit and at the heart of many of your cultures, I'm familiar with some of your tribal cultures. I know people from your tribes. They are so proud of you and somebody is watching you. Somebody is going to watch this and it will inspire them. And that's where I would hope that the deans or the provosts at wherever our institutions are going to personally thank you for your bravery and courage. That day is long overdue, totally long overdue. So I want to make sure that you are acknowledged very deeply for that. So thank you. Naish, we would say. Thank you.
I was just writing that in the text and in the chat's taking me too long. I think that's great, Dr. Yellowbird, because actually I'm going to go back to what Tara said about the tax. So it's the tax, you know, like you're the only minority, you know, you're the minority in the minority. And so you're on the committees, they expect you to be on all the panels. And before you know it, you're not able to write the papers, get the grants, all those other things that you need to do in order to get promoted. So, you know, as you continue to go along your path, if your path is, you know, your PhD, your higher degree, and in any job, any level that you're going to, you have to be able to protect yourself and you have to be able to say no. And so I love what Tara said, you know, that, you know, about the set. I love that. And I think the sooner you learn that, I didn't learn that. I did not learn that early enough. So I'm like behind in terms of where I should be, you know, but that's because you have to be able to do that and do that early, because otherwise it will wear you out. It will wear you out. So
yeah, that's right. I really appreciate everyone who attended tonight. I know we have some people that probably need to get to their next thing or caregiving or whatnot. But I want to thank Dr. Dixon and Dr. Roy and Miss Candace for reaching out with this idea and saying, let's do this, and being so proactive about convening Native voices and wanting to have this panel. I just really appreciate it. I appreciate you valuing our students and our faculty and our administrators. And I hope that all of you that attended tonight have learned something. And I encourage you to keep going with that learning and go to a powwow after COVID. And get involved and continue your learning. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you,
Sherwood.
Dr. Sherwood. Thank you for organizing this. You did a lovely job.
Thank you, Dr. Sherwood. Thank you, Dr. Roy, for pulling
you.
this together and making this come together too. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, the panelists.
Yeah, thank you guys. And also too, I want to thank Candace Moore.
And Candace.
She does so much, man. The flyer, man, and setting this up, man. You're only good as the people, as your team. So I got an awesome team with Dr. Sherwood, the panelists. Dr. Yellow Robe is one of my, real mentors. She's a wonderful person. I've known her so long. And, so thank everyone for coming. And we look forward to seeing you at another Courageous Conversation. Everyone have a good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. It was nice to meet you guys. Tristan, I think